Now what we need to know, and I think all Israelis want to know also, is how his latest moves, ongoing ones, affect Israel. What we see, obviously our main topic last week when we were making predictions for 2026, the one thing that wasn't on our radar was a capture of Maduro, the takeover of Venezuela. I mean, who would have even thought of that? And by the way, Trump is also warning other Latin American leaders that they better shape up or they may suffer the same fate. He's also saying that he wants to buy Greenland. But most importantly, I would say if we focus right now on Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas. So let's talk about that for a minute, about the protests in Iran.
I want to take one issue with something you just said, Ruthie. I don't think the Americans, it's clear they're taking over Venezuela. I think it's much more open what's going to happen there. Are they going to work with the existing regime now under the vice president? Are they going to go for the human rights activists to receive the award from the Nobel Prize instead of Trump? Yes, it's not clear to me. But what is clear to me as an Israeli, I'm looking, how does this affect Israel? How does it affect the Middle East? I think a very strong positive. Why? Once again, Trump has shown himself that you don't mess with me, and that he is willing to use force when he thinks it's in the American national interest. He's not a pacifist. He's showing that he doesn't just talk, he will act. And that's a crucial message for bad actors across the world, but it's also a crucial message for bad actors in the Middle East. Specifically, people like Hamas, specifically, and we'll talk about it a lot, about the dictatorship in Iran. Because when, a few days ago, President Trump said that he would respond if they start massacring their protesters, yes? That's a message that the Iranians, after seeing what happened in Venezuela, they have to take that message more seriously. And so I think a more robust America that is feared by its enemies, that is a good policy move.
Oh, not only is it a good policy move, but it just shows it's in stark contrast to the Obama administration and then its clone in the Biden administration. Obama said he was leading from behind, and he proceeded to do that. And the whole globe has suffered as a result of his policies. And because Trump only had one term prior to Biden's entry into the White House, he didn't manage. First of all, he was inexperienced. Now he's more experienced, but also he didn't have time enough to fix all that was going wrong. And what we've seen is that the message he's conveying is that, right, I'm the new sheriff in town, or the old sheriff in town, and I mean business. And he keeps making good on his promises. It's also a clear message. Maybe he doesn't mean it to be, but it's a clear message to the isolationists in the Republican Party, the woke right, those who say that accuse anybody who believes that America should exercise its power outside of the borders of the United States as neocon warmongers. And he is just ignoring that wing of his party, which is interesting because his vice president, J.D. Vance, tends a little more in their direction, if not fully, but I mean, he hasn't totally come out on their side. And it's interesting that he's been quite absent of late. Now, but why this affects all of us, it affects Israel, and it doesn't contradict America first at all. Israel needs a strong America. But let's talk a minute about, while he's doing this, he has, together with Israel, disabled or seriously weakened the Iranian regime, seriously weakened Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, etc. However, and by the way, he is encouraging or greenlighting another serious Israeli operation in Lebanon against Hezbollah. But meanwhile, he is brokering and insisting on peace talks between Syria and Israel. And that's worrisome. as is Turkey's preparations to join this coalition of forces in Gaza. So these are two, I think, serious problems for Israel that also are due to Trump.
So on Syria, first of all, I don't think there are peace talks. I don't think anyone thinks somehow there's peace or normalization between Israel and Syria anytime soon. But as we said last week in our New Year predictions, what's happening is Israel and Syria are working on some sort of security arrangement, which will allow Israel to redeploy in southern Syria. And there'll be some arrangements reached about demilitarized zones and safety for the Druze community. It won't be a peace treaty, but there can be security arrangements made. We had them with the Assad regime. Henry Kissinger famously in his shuttle diplomacy negotiated a Syrian-Israel, it was security arrangement that was actually, from 1974 following the Yom Kippur War. It lasted for decades. And so I hope it's possible to negotiate such an agreement with Syria. Once again, it won't be peace. Israel will have to remain strong. We'll have to keep our eye on the ball. We can't have any sort of phony hope that somehow the Syrians are going to be good neighbors. But an agreement that they have an interest to keep, that we have an interest in keep, and that stabilizes the border area. Ultimately, at the moment, as we speak, we have a large amount of Israeli troops in southern Syria. And so far, so good. But you can overextend that sort of thing. And so if it's possible to reach an agreed deal, which allows for Israeli deployment while guaranteeing Israeli security, if that's possible, and if you get the Americans to be the orchestrator of the deal, to be the sponsor of the deal, to be the person who is responsible for the deal, like in Lebanon, where America played a huge role in getting the ceasefire and Israel has its freedom of action where Hezbollah violates. If we can get the same sort of thing in Syria, I think that's a net positive.
Oh, but something, it's not true that the talks are just about security. In fact, the first set of talks between actual Israelis and Syrians are about civilian cooperation, not military, not defense and security. Agriculture, water, I don't know, all kinds of civilian things. And why is that worrisome? It sounds good, right? But meanwhile, there are Kurds being slaughtered in Syria as well. The point is, Ashara has not proven himself. Again, I've been saying he's a terrorist and a tie, and, perhaps he can reform. But, it looks to me like what he's going to try to do is pretend that whenever there are massacres of people Israel wants to protect, he's going to play the it wasn't me card. Those were ISIS forces. Those were Al-Qaeda forces. Just like in Lebanon, where the Lebanese army says, well, that's not us, it's Hezbollah. We're trying. So the point is, you cannot trust regimes like that. And I hope that President Trump is not totally trusting him. I don't know. We are also seeing cracks in Saudi Arabia's, all this talk about we're going to have some deal with Saudi Arabia and maybe Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords. That's not looking likely at all, though you also predicted that wouldn't happen last week in our podcast. But so the thing is that all these really important good things are going on. And, the question is Trump just shooting from the hip, or is he actually establishing an incredible strategy for what he said, the Western Hemisphere? That's where Greenland comes into this, and Latin America, et cetera. A lot of people say, Trump has no strategy. He just wakes up one day and does this and that. However, may I just say that for someone with no strategy, he's done more as a U.S. president than his predecessors in decades. So, I'd like to give him a lot of credit, whether I just can't see that that's by accident. Let's put it that way.
So I'm not sure if he has strategy either, but I think he thinks intuitively, and a lot of his gut instincts are good. He knows that this is a tough world, and America has to be tough, and America has to be willing to use power. And when dealing with bad people, the threat of using power is crucial. Machiavelli, who we all read in high school, yes, famously said about leaders, and he was writing about Italian leaders in the Middle Ages, but let's leave that aside. He said, leaders want to be loved and feared, but if you have to choose one, choose to be feared. And Hamas and Hezbollah, you want them to fear you. Any Israeli-Syrian security deal has to be based on their perception for the Syrians that if they break the deal, they need to fear the consequences. And if America is being one of the auspices, yes, of this security deal, they will fear that. And if Israel is not the Kurds, Israel is very strong, and the Syrians know that. And so once again, it's important for deterrence to work, for these deals to work, that your enemy fears what happens if they break these agreements. In Lebanon, you said before, there's talk of giving Israel a green light to go into Lebanon because Hezbollah has refused to disarm. And my understanding is correct. There's all this stuff coming out after the Trump-Netanyahu meeting in Mar-a-Lago. Yes, what was said to Israel about acting against Hezbollah? They're acting, obviously, they're in contravention of the ceasefire agreement. They're not agreeing to disarm. They should be disarming, and they're not doing it yet. My understanding of the reality is that we need Israel military pressure on Hezbollah, on the government of Lebanon, so that they move forward with disarmament, and there will be Israeli military operations with the United States giving a green light to that. That means more Israeli strikes on Hezbollah targets, more Israeli strikes on Hezbollah military infrastructure, and so forth. Excuse me. It does not mean, I don't think, in my understanding, does not mean full-scale Israel-Lebanon war like we've seen in the past.
Well, first of all, let me just add something to that. You're absolutely right about strength and keeping the enemies nervous, fearful. But here's the thing, and this is what makes Venezuela different from the others that we've been talking about. Whatever else you want to say about Venezuela and the corrupt government and the drug trafficking and housing Hezbollah and other terrorist groups, etc., Latin America is not a radical Islamist country. They are not Islamist countries. And there's a huge difference between that. And you can have an axis of evil there in cooperation. But the culture is not one of jihad. That's not their culture. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because I think maybe President Trump doesn't grasp that it's not enough to make Hezbollah and the Ayatollahs fear your military operations. They have an ideology which also involves involves martyrdom. And one of the concerns, and I think that this is why Israel is really preparing, is that Hezbollah, first of all, Hezbollah is not going to disarm, and neither is Hamas. There's no such thing. They won't exist. That's who they are. So that means you have to completely wipe them out. But that means you would have to then extend the war. But the issue is, will Hezbollah attack Israel? And will the Ayatollahs in Iran give, one of these kind of Hail Mary, the Ayatollah's packing and getting ready maybe to abscond to Russia if things get too bad. But in the meantime, to fire at Israel the remaining ballistic missiles that it has. This is one of the things that Israel is aware of, that they're not rational actors in that sense. Terrorist organizations and terrorist states are not rational actors in the way that, I hate to use that word rational. They have strategy and they have politics and tactics, but they also have this ideology that goes beyond that. And that's something that Westerners never grasp. And that is why I think Latin America is a different ballgame.
Can I say that if Iran was stupid enough to start shooting rockets at Israel, and their logic would be they've got all these protests internally, their regime is threatened by starting a war with Israel, maybe they can stabilize their internal situation. I would say they are being foolish in the extreme. Because as we saw in the 12-day war and before, we saw that Israel can hit specific targets with great accuracy, and that in our response, we could hit regime targets in a way that will actually make the regime much more fragile and allow the people actually to overthrow that terrible authoritarian, theological, thuggish regime that they have there in Tehran. So the Iranians should be very careful what they wish for, because I think Israel has the ability, and we would have, of course, legitimacy. If they attack us with missiles, Israel can strike back hard. We can also strike back, and we haven't done it so far, against their oil industry and so forth, creating economic havoc and chaos, even more than there is at the moment. And so they should think twice or three times before attacking us. In fact, in many ways, if they attack us, they solve the problem for us. We don't have to preempt. We can respond, and we can respond very forcibly. And I think America might be part of it again. And who knows? It could actually expedite regime change in Tehran. It could actually be a blessing for Israel if Iran decides to shoot first.
No, but you see, there's where you and I part ways. I think what we saw on October 7th, and we've seen this again and again in Israel's wars and throughout these wars. No, I think enough responding. We need to preempt. And I really think the Israeli army is preparing for that scenario. The question is when you preempt, obviously, right? In a chicken game, you're not going to just launch strikes. But having said that, enough being sitting ducks already, okay? You realize that even northern Israel, where most Israelis have returned to their homes and all that, but the fact is, there are not enough bomb shelters here we saw during the 12-day war that the kind of missiles that Hamas had been firing were nothing compared to those that Iran was firing. And even the Houthi missiles did more damage. And there was a huge difference. Israelis who had been in like safe rooms during Hamas attacks had to be in full-fledged bomb shelters and practically live in them during the 12-day war because that damage was far greater. We need to preempt, and the question is when. And because right now I'm hoping we can rely on the Mossad and military intelligence in general that totally failed. The military intelligence totally failed on October 7th at best. I mean, there are conspiracy theorists who say it was not just failure.
Don't go there, Ruth.
Okay, we'll see. However, they totally failed. They totally dropped the ball, and hopefully they won't do that again. And that means preempting, not just waiting to get legitimacy to attack. We have legitimacy. And by the way, nobody gives us legitimacy even when we've got it. So that is my feeling. And I think that may be why there were reports that Trump was pressuring Netanyahu to launch another war against Hezbollah rather than just green lighting it, because he may understand that, especially since his tackling of Venezuela, that has a lot to do with Hezbollah and the narco terrorism that is connected directly to Iran as well. That without wiping out Hezbollah even more than we've done, it's going to be hard to keep the lid even on the narco terrorism. You know, it's like whack-a-mole. You hit here and then this one pops up and that one pops up. We're not done with this war. That's all there is to it.
I never said we were done with the war. All I was saying was, I think we have to be smart the way we pursue this. Depending on, first of all, neither you or I see the intelligence, what the Iranians are doing, what they're trying to rebuild, what they're not trying to rebuild. I think Israel has to be very clever, and we have to coordinate as best we can with the United States. But once again, if there's talk and, that the Iranians might try to get out of their own problems by striking Israel, I'm just telling they'll only create more problems for themselves. There is a chance, and this is the good news, that you'll see change in Iran, right? We spoke about that last week. There's a serious chance. And since we spoke last week, we've seen more and more protests in Iran spreading across more cities with more people involved, right? The regime there is hated. And the regime there is exposed, as we said last week, for being weak. And a weak autocracy doesn't go together very well. Weak autocracies are overthrown if the autocracy is feared, so the people stay at home. But if the autocracy is seen as being weak, the people are out there demonstrating. I saw a report yesterday, for the first time, people are protesting, and their faces are clearly shown. They're not wearing masks, they're not wearing scarves. In other words, they're not afraid. That's a major change. Now, we don't know where this is going. Will there be a regime change in Iran or not? Of course, we hope so. We'd like to have a government in Iran that wants to live in peace with all of us and cooperate with us all. In the past, we did have such a government in Iran. Is it possible to get such a government again in the future? Of course, it's possible. We hope. Maybe it's more probable than ever before. It might happen. It might not happen. But even in the interim, let's presume that the regime in the coming weeks and months manages somehow to muddle on and deal with the protests. But even in that situation, they have to be so focused on what goes on inside Iran, they're trying to, send resources to give their people more money so they stop protesting and things like that. Now, whether they succeed or not, it's a different question. But the mere fact that they have to focus on their survival, and the mere fact they're devoting resources to try to bribe the public, to deal with some of the economic issues and so forth, means they've got less resources to help Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and the other bad guys. And so for all those reasons, what's happening in Iran is a very net positive, even if you don't get regime change in the short term, though I'm sure you're going to get it in the medium term.
I laughed when you said trying to give them money. You know that the regime said it wants to give every Iranian $7.
Correct.
So that's why I laughed.
Maybe $7 buys a lot in Iran. I don't know.
Let me tell you something.
Yeah.
No. Okay. They're out of water. They're out of electricity. Their supermarket shelves are empty, and they're furious at many things. Not only because of the repressive regime that's been going on for decades, and not only because of treatment of women, et cetera, and political opponents, but because they are furious that the regime says, oh, great, you're spending money on Hezbollah and the Houthis, and you talk about Palestinians. What about us? What about us? And all that money you got from the West and all that. And they're furious, and they have a right to be. Now, when you say regime change, here's the thing. People always, Middle East experts says, well, what's regime change? You don't know what's going to come after. It could be worse. Now, first of all, I say, really? It could be worse? No, I disagree. Number two, there's no way that we can let when I say we, I mean all good people and also the Iranians can allow this particular regime to stay in power. It is true. We don't know who's coming afterwards. That is true. And it's possible that who comes afterwards also will have to be dealt with. But that doesn't mean you leave these ones in power just because, as I often use this analogy, I always say, you can't always, the choice between Jack the Ripper and the Boston Strangler, well, you have to kill both. It's not a choice. And then there are, now it's hard to tell because there are reports coming out of Iran that are not verified, and we don't know. One report says that the Revolutionary Guards, if the Ayatollahs get toppled or abscond, that the Revolutionary Guards are taking over, and that would be very bad. There are other reports that say some of the Revolutionary Guards are defecting, which would be really good. Then there's, talk of, the opposition. There's a problematic opposition because the main opposition to the Iranian regime is abroad, is in America and England and that kind of thing. They're not actually living in Iran. So you've got the son of the Shah, Pahlavi, and then you also have the MEK, which is, I know you hate when I use this expression. They're communist Islamists. And so they're no good, even though many people in the West get confused by them. They think that Maryam Rajavi, who heads that organization, she's the hope of Iran. No, but we don't know. But what I'm saying is there's no question that those Ayatollahs have got to go. And by the way, we were just talking about this before the broadcast, that Senator Lindsey Graham just said, I think it was yesterday, he said, President Trump won't rule out targeting or assassinating the Ayatollah Khamenei, and he better watch out. Basically, don't try us because, and we know that Khamenei is worried about that because we know it. definitely in a bunker. He's preparing in case he has to abscond. We do know that is a fact. It doesn't mean he'll do it, but we know that he's preparing.
So there's also a question they say, why, Iran, the people have protested in the past. There have been huge wage of protests in 2009, huge wage of protests more recently over the hijab issue. And now we've got a wave today. And you have to say, what's different? So number one, what's different is the situation inside Iran is more difficult than ever before. And you talked about the economic issues. What's different is the regime was exposed by being weak just a few months ago in the 12-day war when Israeli planes could fly at will over Tehran. And once again, all autocracies need the fear of their strength, and they were exposed as being weaklings. And the third thing is the response of the West. When you had the big demonstrations in 2009, Obama was very, very quiet. He later publicly admitted that he made a mistake. Now you've got an American president who says publicly, you attack, you massacre the protesters, and you will have consequences, yes? And so for all these reasons, for people who want to see change in Iran, it appears much, much more hopeful, though you're correct. There's not a recognized opposition leader. Some of the opposition leaders, some of the opposition groups maybe are not our cup of tea either. But I tend to agree with your overall assessment which it can't get worse than the current regime. I have a question for you, Ruthie. Why is it that in Europe and in North America, we've seen a few protests by usually expatriate Iranians who are out there waving their Iranian flag saying the regime's got to go, and stop, don't allow them to massacre the Iranian protesters and the Iranian people, and we want to see freedom and democracy for Iran. And yet, beyond that, you don't see mass demonstrations, not in New York, not in London, not in Paris, right? It's only the expat Iranian communities that are out there. What is it that the so-called, the people who are the human rights crowds and the progressives and the college students, what is it about Iran that it's not for want of a better word, a sexy issue that they, if they love to protest against Israel, but what, with all our, we're still a democracy, yeah, we're a normal country, but against this clerical, thuggish, sexist, homophobic, I can keep going with adjectives about what the Iranian regime is all about, and that quiet, what's going on here?
Well, first of all, we know the progressive left is, hypocritical beyond belief, that we know. And when you say human rights groups, you have to put that in quotes. The answer is that aside from the fact that it's not, as you say, it's not a sexy issue. Well, for one thing, any issue that Israel highlights, that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been screaming about the need to defeat the Iranian regime for years and years and years, that's enough to put the left on the other side. That's number one. Number two, notice that the media, do you realize that Western media barely covering these protests in Iran? Israel, it's topping the news on every news broadcast practically, and our newspapers and everything. It's not even on the front of the New York Times or the Telegraph, and it's just not. That's another reason. A third is when you talk about the human rights groups and the left and the progressives and they are, first, aside from the fact that they're on the wrong side of almost every issue, they are against Trump, they're against Netanyahu. They are, think of how many of those same people were against the capture of Maduro. Suddenly, they're defending Maduro. The new mayor of New York, Zoran Mamdani, had announced that when he becomes mayor, if Netanyahu arrives in New York, he'll have him arrested. Now, first of all, he doesn't have the authority to do that, but never mind his statement about it. But that Maduro is arrested and brought to justice, even though under the Biden administration, a huge bounty was put out on his head. He's going to stand criminal trial for narco-terrorism and drug trafficking and all that. Mamdani was against that arrest. He's for an arrest of Netanyahu and against the arrest of Maduro. So when you ask, how come only a handful of Iranian expats who are worried about Iran and their family and everything in Iran? That's the answer. You cannot turn, and by the way, the woke right is just as bad because they have this new Their thing is no. America first doesn't mean, for some reason, America first doesn't mean a strong America internationally. I don't know why. They've totally twisted Trump's whole MAGA philosophy. But that, as I say, here's where the woke left and the woke right meet. It's that horseshoe thing. And it's terrible. But you know what? Israel, we're used to that. We're used to the hypocrisy at the UN, everywhere. We're used to it. And what we have to do is stop caring so much about what is said by that and do what we have to do.
You know what? First of all, I agree. We have to do what we have to do. But I wanted to raise, I mean, you talk about university students, so, you know, that's like political theater. What I think is deserving of serious criticism is the fact that it's only the US government and, in a more measured way, Israel, in our public comments in support for the protesters in Iran. The Canadians, the Australians, the British, the Europeans have said practically nothing. In other words, from the point of view of all these people who always present themselves as do-gooders and international order, all this, you have this brutal regime that threatens its own people, threatens the neighborhood, nuclear program that without Israel would be very, very, very developed, right? Israel and the United States and America also came in to help get rid of it, right? Terrible regime, supports terrorism, supports aggression, all its neighbors worry about it, and yet silence. Australia, Canada, Britain, Europe. And you have to ask the question, what is going on in the world? And under once again, when it happened in 2009, America also shut up. Now, at least then, the American president said, the then American president said, I made a mistake. I should have said something. He said so a few years later, right?
Excuse me a second. Excuse me a second. One second. One. Obama, let me just correct one thing. Obama, it wasn't just that he was silent. He said we need outreach to the Muslim world, outreach, and it's better. We need to deal with the Ayatollahs. His saying he made a mistake. No, his worldview hasn't changed one iota.
So I was going to say the following. It's not just Iran's Muslim neighbors fear Iran. Iran's Muslim citizens fear the Iranian government. And I think the silence of the Western world, let's leave America out of it, has been deafening, and there's no excuse for it.
Well, you know something, you know what is interesting? You're pointing that out. We have this ironic situation where you could say the Arab countries are, some of them, many of them, trying to Westernized to some extent, modernized to some extent, while the West is becoming more jihadist. The West is becoming infiltrated by jihadis, by massive immigration in America, illegal immigration. In Europe, a lot of it was enabled and some of it's illegal, whatever. The point being that the West imported jihad into its own borders, while the countries, the Arab countries and other Muslim countries are trying to rid themselves of it. We're having this weird switch.
I can see on the clock we're running out of time, but I think that is incorrect in this place because that does not explain Muslim immigration to Western countries. That explains criticism of Israel because it does not explain European and other Western silence on what's going on with Iran, because most of those Muslims are Sunni Muslims and they have no love whatsoever for the regime in Tehran. I think there's something else going on here, whether it's economic interests, whether it's they can't agree with Trump because they have to show that they're different, whether they don't really care about human rights and democracy. It's only when it comes, Israel, right? Every time, right? But there's no doubt that their hypocrisy has been exposed very clearly on the Iranian issue.
No question about it. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. And by next week, God knows what's waiting for us.
Right. All right, let's switch over to Atheist Republic.
Go back a few minutes. They're saying go back a few minutes.
I did.
Which is what many of you have said explicitly and some of you have said implicitly. That's what I have an objection to. The idea that this was not justified is absurd, and I think everybody knows it in their heart. Yeah.
What's he talking about?
In the green jacket.
It seems like political violence is ratcheting up and riots around the corner. What steps does the administration have planned to try to unite America? Average people on both political sides are so tired.
Okay, it's after this conversation. That's fine. Let's just listen to this and then we'll get to that part.
Do you have any words to unite America?
You know, I know you don't want to be a part of the problem, and I think that's true of a lot of you. I'm not sure it's true for everybody because the reporting over this is
Tough to hear.
1 hour, 21 minutes. Okay.
I've never seen a case so misrepresented and misreported when you have a guy who was defending himself and is now being treated as some sort of federal assassin by so many of the people in this room. First of all, let me say about crime. You mentioned violence. One of the things we're proudest about is that you saw violent crime over the last year drop by 20%. Why is that drop by 20%? At least 4 years. So here's the problem. That's not the debate so many people are having. They are actively covering for people who are committing acts of violence against federal law enforcement. What young mother shows up and decides they're going to throw that
In Minnesota, the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis.
Talk about disagreement with our policy. Don't use your protest as a justification or an encouragement for people to go and incite violence and participate in violence against our law enforcement officials. To the people on the ground in Minneapolis, meaning the local officials in Minneapolis, people and white people, there are Democrats, clear fraud. We're going to take off of this. We know that there were schools who either had no enrollment or unconstitutional. One of the big issues there is that person was not an appointed general agency White House that's being led from the President of the United States on down. And that's going to give them the resources, the access to material and information to make this person more effective. I think a lot of people have asked, how are you really going to get to the heart of the fraud? We've been asking ourselves that question for the past couple of months than it has ever been investigated in the United States of America. We are doing so much to try to find the financing networks and the domestic terrorism networks that legitimate this violence, that fund this violence.
Help us out in the chat. Is it forward or?
These people should not feel emboldened because they have
for
the first time,
10751.
maybe in American history, an administration that is not going to tolerate political violence of any
Nailed Bunny, are you
kind
there?
from anywhere.
Someone said 107.51 on the right note.
It's not clear today that the entire weight of the federal government is behind these ICE agents and this.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Nail Bunny, can you give us the timestamp? Nail Bunny.
It only goes to 103, so how could it be 103?
President Trump.
Yeah, what the hell?
It has to be here because we're at the end of it.
Kept this up. So I've heard a couple of things. One, that I was kept out of the planning for the Venezuela in violation of our immigration laws. Then we have the mandate, and in fact, we have the legal duty to enforce those immigration laws. Whether he's been placed on administrative leave, I don't know the answer to that question.
I just can't hear much.
Department of Homeland Security, and they can follow up.
What
I will
is the
say, look,
timestamp?
I would appreciate everybody saying a prayer for that agent. Look, in the past,
So it's the last
Right,
4 minutes.
so-
I think.
I don't know. So here's what's going to happen. So the YouTube, the Twitter live stream is what? It's like, 103.56. So if someone can give us the timestamp, we'll do it. We'll play it. But otherwise, we're gonna just go back because if it was just one question, or I think that's not really.
People are saying he didn't really say much.
Yeah, he didn't say much anyway. All right, so let's just go back. Let's just go back to the super chats then, so we can answer some more of the questions here. Wait, where's the layout? There we go.
Well, they're not going to talk
Okay,
about.
so the next super chat is oh yeah, so we did that one. Thank you so much. We need to tag President Trump and people close to him to meet with Reza Pahlavi. That'll give a clear message to the MEK communists to step out. I think Laura Loomer is on that.
Yeah. Okay. I think we are going to come back later to Iran. Right now, we're not getting anything, and I want action. I want to see results. I want to see all of it. So that's it. We are going to go. We gotta go. Oh, Iran Watch. Yeah, I'll leave it as Iran Watch. I do need to change one thing though. I got to change that to that. Thank you for watching. That doesn't look good, does it? No. Well, that doesn't look good either. How about that? How about that? There we go. That looks better. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. We'll be back soon. Take care, and I love you all. See you in the next little while. Bye-bye.